A colour scientist and also a colorist, primarily for Warner Brothers. He's been involved in over 30 films, including, what was the name of the film? Exodus.
Exodus, yeah.
Exodus. and even more on TV shows, notably Game of Thrones, super popular. Dado's been very involved in that. And also, Dado's a pioneer in HDR because he was the colorist who did the very first HDR graded TV show, which was Marco Polo Series 2. So he's really, has more knowledge about HDR than maybe anybody else in Hollywood. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Dado, who's going to take you through and explain a little bit about the color grading process.
Thank you very much, thank you. So welcome everybody to my grading theater. So before I begin, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever attended a color grading session in life? Have you ever been to a color grading?
Yeah.
You have? Who else? 2, 3, 4. Okay, we have few people. Okay, good. All right. So I know for the.
Leave the room.
No, it's okay. They can also, normally when you go to the color grading session, you only see colorist work, but you guys are going to have a privilege also to hear me talk and explain what I do. So I think I'm going to try to basically give you a little bit in an explanation to really what happens. Color grading is a process that has existed for since ever films existed, but for many years it was like a little bit of a hidden kind of skill. There was always a little magic dust around it, and like many facilities or companies that were doing color grading did not necessarily share how it's done and all of this. Simply because the impact that we put on the image is huge, and really if you ever wondered how come you can watch a Hollywood production, you can see that it looks better than your wedding video, is usually because of the color grading process that has been applied to it. I want to basically explain you a little bit to kind of what happens, but also let me just try to kind of show you a little bit to how color grading theater is set up. So what I got here is a system called DaVinci Resolve, and this is like a standard, it's like a Photoshop for images. It's DaVinci Resolve is a standard. What you can also do, you can download it yourself and you can start playing with it. It's become very common software to use. It's very powerful, but originally started really in Hollywood, it was used for big movies, and now it has become a little bit more democratized. This particular system is a little bit beefed up because it can do 4K in real time, and and I can do simultaneous HDR SDR. You'll see a little bit set up slightly differently. What you see here is a monitor, which is a reference monitor that we all are using. There is really only one monitor that you can buy today and call it a reference HDR monitor, and this is this monitor here. It cost about $30,000. If you had to buy one today, you couldn't buy it because the Sony stopped making them. But so now actually they're probably even more expensive than what they used to cost. It's because you can't really get them. But this monitor, when we started, was the only monitor. It's still, but what we had a challenge with this monitor, while it's looking absolutely fantastic, no one complained about that. Think about it, if you're in a grading situation like you are right now, and the director comes, a producer, cinematographer, the girlfriend and the dog and runner, and we all gather around this monitor, it becomes a little bit crowded. We didn't really have the size that we really wanted to have for it. So we were always attempting to get something a little bit bigger. How could we get a monitor that is bigger, but it's also going to give us results that are, what the professional monitor can do. And it's never really happened. We always had to cut corners a little bit and figure out what to do. However, what was very interesting is that, Panasonic has also one office in Hollywood. And also, many years ago, Panasonic used to, manufacture screens that were originally Pioneer, and then they got renamed Panasonic, that were called BT3000, and they were a really standard plasma monitors for theaters. We really used them all as a client monitors. It was so maybe the conversation started going with these people, and somehow we ended up showing our desire to have a monitor that could be on par with this monitor, that we could match and really work with it as a monitor. Now what happened last year, it was really first time that we got an OLED version of this monitor that was 65 inch. And the moment we put it into the grading theater, And we were able to match it, and as you can see, these two monitors are matching very much. So like I'm going to now, at the moment I'm still in SDR mode. I'm going to explain you why. You know, we realized that this monitor has become a center point of the grading suite, because, you know, just seeing HDR on a bigger screen has just given us so much more idea to what it's really going to look like. So kind of this reference monitor moved a little bit on the side, so we like to kind of keep it a little bit so that we can still look at it and check how things are happening. But, you know, we are really able to look at this monitor as our reference monitor. This particular monitor is a 65-inch monitor from this year. And the improvement on it is that the panel has got like a little bit improvement on the cooling side, so it can be a little bit brighter. Because all it always had this difficulty that was missing, you know, some 100 nits or something like that to be like a fully 1000 nits sometimes and all of that. So now this monitor has got enough brightness to be fully 1000 nits straight without any problems. And also, like, you know, there was an improvement to the engine, the color engine. So what happened just before you came, like, you know, I put this monitor up and then I switched this monitor into professional 1 mode and they were matching. It is just, you know, so basically what Panasonic did very well is that they kind of pre-calibrated and made the right settings that basically this monitor can look out of the box really like, you know, as much and match the reference monitors the way they are at the moment. So what I would like to do with you now is I'd like to show you how like a grading session really would look like. If you were to be a director or cinematographer, what would really happen if you were to sit with us in the grading theater. So the first thing I want to explain to you is that, you know, I'm going to actually work right now in SDR mode. And the reason why I'm doing that is because in production today, we don't really see HDR image until this point. What happens is that, you know, on set, we don't monitor HDR. We monitor normal standard dynamic range. And even if you had a HDR monitor, you wouldn't be able to use it much because you need the darkness, you know, you need a kind of controlled environment to see it. And then sometimes you're on set and the field, and, you know, HDR doesn't really work like that. Also, in editing process, you know, director sits sometimes for weeks looking at SDR images. So they're very much used to an image looking in SDR image. So what we do is when the director and the cinematographer come to the grading theater, we start with an SDR look. We say, okay, let's kind of, you know, before we kind of start going into like a straight away HDR, let's just see what we shot and how we did it and how things should look like. So for example, let's say I'm going to go and you know, like just, you know, basically maybe I could use this shot, or let me see if I have one that kind of has a little bit more, okay, maybe this shot here. So I'm gonna like just reset it now so that you can see really what happens. So color, reset all, and this is what camera raw looks like. And you're probably, oh my God, what happened to an image right now, right? Couldn't they shoot it a little bit better than that, all these professionals? Now basically what happens is this. In order for us to be able to capture dynamic range that we need for HDR and the gamut for HDR, we need to save image in particular format that is going to compress that information inside that smaller digital file. And this process is called also logarithmic color encoding, or log. You must have heard it. Like, you know, Panasonic's got this V-log, or, you know, S-log, you know, so pretty much every camera manufacturer today has come up with some sort of log. What log really does, it takes all this beautiful color information and packs it into a file, but when you look at it, it just looks like this. It looks very unpleasing. It looks like really, really bad. So what we have to do is we have to start first by making this image look like, you know, giving it some sort of look. Now, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go and, you know, apply like the first part of like a look creation is deciding on the contrast. And let me explain you why. Okay, so let me show you why. So now I have applied just like a standard contrast, and what I'm going to do now as well, I'm going to switch off color so that we can focus just on the contrast. Contrast for us humans is more important than the color. And the reason why is because we have exponentially more, you know, cones that are sensitive to light change, that then we have receptors for color. We actually don't see color very well. It's our brain that is making us see all the color that we really see, but actually we don't have as many receptors for color. What we can really recognize very well is the smallest contrast changes. So for actually a good look, the right contrast is sometimes more important than the color. The reason why black and white photography existed for so long is just because we are so able to understand the emotion out of black and white image. So this is basically what we would normally do. We would start and just say, okay, how should we make the contrast look? How should it be feel? And the relationship between contrast and emotion, or what we're trying to do with an image, is such that the higher the contrast, like I'm going to do now, you see, I'm going to reduce the shadow and I'm going to increase the highlight. The higher the contrast, the more tension, or the more attention you're drawing to an image. The reason why all the fashion shoots and car commercials are high contrast is because you want the audience to pay attention to it. So for example, if I was to make this scene like a very action scene, I would make this contrast look a little bit like this. I would say, okay, this is my kind of very high contrast scenario, right? Or on the opposite, if this was just kind of, a very regular moment, what I could do is I could say, no, I'm just going to make it a little bit flat looking with a lower contrast, So you see the difference between one or another. It really influences the emotion and the atmosphere in the image a lot. So first thing we do is we say, okay, fine, since this is some sort of action scene, let's go and start, with a relatively high contrast so that we basically get, some sort of response from the whole image that we want. And then I'm going to bring back the saturation, okay? Now the next thing we need to do is we need to then inject the color palette. Now, this is how it works. So we used to make movies on film, as you probably know, and then we moved into digital. And what was really nice about film is that cinematographer would choose a film stock, and based on the film stock, they would give movie a certain look, a certain palette. Okay. Now, when the digital cameras came along, we lost it because there was no film stock anymore. So what we had to do is we had to come up with a way how we're going to control image in a certain way, and that's very important because you want to give a signature to every frame in the movie that it becomes recognizable. So for example, if I was to show you a frame from let's say movie 7 or Drive, you would know exactly it's that movie, even though it would be completely random frame. It's like that radio game when they play a snippet of a song and say, oh no, it's Sister Sledge, whatever. So this is exactly what happens with color. It operates exactly in the same way. So what we need to do is we need to apply what we call a show lot. So that's the concept. We try to give the whole movie its own DNA. So what I can do with this kind of palettes is I can go, for example, I want to have a neutral palette. This would be one that you normally use, for some sort of when you try to make colors as neutral as possible. Or I could go and say, no, let me actually make it look like a film stock. So I could go and say a Kodak print stock with a little bit an F curve. So let's say I do this, for example, is more to what a film look would be like. If I had shot this movie on film, it would feel like this. Or for example, I could say, no, there was this kind of particular film stock, that we liked, which was basically used on Lord of the Rings. It's a Fuji stock, so I can basically maybe use this stock. Okay, so either way, what we do is we decide on how we are going to, let me just show you how they look like, selected versions. So you see, by choosing different palettes, I can actually completely change, how this movie is going to feel. And usually what we do is we decide on this show lot for the whole project. Okay, we say, okay, there is a certain palette we're going to stick with. So let's say I quite like this particular palette, the Kodak palette, so let's go, we're going to stick with that. Okay, so now we decided on that, we understand what the look is going to be. The next step for us is going to be to order gin and tonic for everybody. That's what happens now when we have, no, sorry.
Cool.
Okay, next time we're going to organize it. All right, so what we're going to do next is I'm going to switch it now to be a HDR. Now, as you can see, like we work what we call color managed, and when you do that, it's easy to switch from one format to another. So I'm just going to go and switch it now to be a HDR image. So suddenly now we got it to HDR, and I just need to adjust this look a little bit so it just feels, because you see I'm losing the detail there. It usually happens when you move from SDR, you kind of, had to clamp your highlight, but now I'm just going to bring and decide on this particular kind of look like this. So you see I have like a beautiful looking kind of, image that is in HDR, and it's like basically giving me this kind of filmic response. So it doesn't matter that we show digitally. We still like this aesthetic of film. It's present. It's always here with us. Okay, now when we decided on this, the next step is going to be this: the director and cinematographer would then help me understand what is going on in that scene. And basically, think about it. It's almost like writing a music for a movie. So like, if this was like some love scene, you would probably use some violins and something like that. So what this could look like, if it was to like some friendly situation, I could warm it up like this a little bit, Look, I put a little bit cyan into my shadows, But overall, I make it like a nice, warm looking image. I open it up a little bit more, so it kind of feels like a light and airy. And now, you have a situation, okay, there's something happy going on here. Or more positive. Or I could say, no, listen, this is an action movie. What you want to do, you want to kind of turn it down. And let's make it like a really dangerous, like, like some sort of Jason Bourne look, right? Mm-hmm. So what happens then is basically what I do now is I have now options. I can see, you see, this was like a more dangerous scene, this is more friendly scene. And then based on that, we are able to work around and give this movie a certain signature, a certain feel. And the way how we know that we got the right look is when the audience is watching and then it's not noticing that we did it, The look is just something that very subliminally is in the background. And the moment, you start noticing look, we kind of went too far. We know this is, look is just something that happens in the background. It's not the story, it helps the story. So this is usually kind of our kind of parameter, how we're going to make this feel or how we're going to make this look. Okay? So what happens next is then we start, working with this image further. So like what we then do next is, for example, I want to now go and maybe reduce some of that green in the background, because that green might be a little bit too strong. So I'm just going to go and basically reduce it a little bit like this. So you see, I can go as much as completely removing it. You see, there is no green now. Or I could go and make it much more intense. But what I'm able to do is I'm really able to pick particular colors and just remove them in a kind of, in a way and adjust it. And that kind of helps me a little bit to create the right balance. The most important thing in a movie is always like, actor's face, especially the eyes, a lot of expression, a lot of like, body language is expressed through the eyes. So we're trying to help audience focus on actor's expression. So I'm going to try to do that as well. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and build like a little, show you like a little window, we call it, around his face. Okay, and then also because he's moving, we need to track this window, because of course we don't want to do this frame by frame. So we have the trackers that help us basically lock that particular adjustment to an object. So now I've basically given it, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go and increase a little bit brightness of the face, so that kind of we focus a little bit more on the face. So you see, like I have just given it a little bit accent, but that's usually just enough for us to help it. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to basically go and create another window. And these windows that we're putting, they really help the depth of the image, because screen is two-dimensional, but we're trying to kind of create an illusion of depth. So for example, I'm just going to go and reduce a little bit brightness on this side. And then I'm going to do similar thing, but from the other side. So I'm going to make this kind of little windows that help with this. So you see, for example, like this. I'm just going to darken this edge there. So now what's happening is that, you know, we are focusing more and more on what's important, on his facial expression, because that's where the story is happening. Okay? Now I can go back and increase a little bit more even his face like that. Okay. Now, another thing that we do a lot, and this is especially since 4K came along, it's basically the skin complexion, right? 4K cameras get all the detail, and you know we don't really want to see the detail all the time. It's not really necessary, you know, because if we focus too much on every detail on the skin, we stop following the story. So what we do is we kind of have like a certain tricks that we do, like this one, where we can isolate the skin. So I'm just going to go and basically try to kind of create a little like a isolation. I need to, what we do call a garbage method. So you see, I'm just going to go and, you know, remove everything that's not the skin, like this. Okay, and we're going to have to track it again, so that basically this matte is following the face. Great. And now what I do is I basically go and, you know, apply like a little retouch to it. So you see, like I have just reduced a little bit the skin detail, right? Not kind of blurred it, you know, I'm just kind of reducing. So like this is something we do, by the way, regularly. And, you know, trust me, none of those actors really look as beautiful as they are.
Don't you want to protect the eyes from the...
Sorry?
Don't you want to protect the eyes from the...
I could, you know, but I haven't got time to go too much into every detail right now. You know, like now I could go and make his eyes blue and sharp and, you know, all of these things. You know, there's like a lot of little details that we could then, you know, go and apply, depending how much time we have, and, you know. You know, the difference is this, you know, like when we do a big movie, you know, we spend sometimes months doing it because the movie has got 200 million budget and it's absolutely fine for us to work on it 3 months. But when we work on like a Netflix shows, we get only 4 days per episode. So, you know, I might not have time to fix every eye. You know, I could do it, but, you know, I need to kind of move along because I have 4 days to finish the episode. So you kind of focus on most important things to make it look. This part of the skin processing is important. Like, you know, that's really what, you know, you don't want, you know, people to look ugly. Nobody wants that. So you just really help a little bit with that. So that kind of, you know, gives me like a little, like, you know, kind of a thing where I go like, okay, fine, you know, I got now this kind of scene working. Now, the next step for us, which is what we do a lot, is we start matching, you know. We go like and say, okay, let's go now and basically like now start making sure that the rest of the scene looks the same. Very often, and you know, you'll be surprised how many times, you know, the scene has been shot a week later. You know, this shot of him coming down could have been done another week. You know, they had to reshoot it, God knows. It could be almost on a completely different location, you know. It could be done with a different time of day and so on. So very often we have a huge consistency problems, especially when for the movies that are shooting outside. Oh, there could be a cloud. Oh my God, the cloud came along, the light changed a lot. So we have to do a lot of the matching. So what I would do now is I would say, okay, let me see, this scene does not quite, you know, match. So let me go, need to basically put a little bit warmth into it, you know, like this. So now they kind of, I'm getting closer to that, maybe a little bit more saturation, you know, so that's better, like a little bit more orange in there, like this. Then I'm gonna go and see, let me see what's happening with this shot. Okay, so his face is a little bit too red there. So what I need to do here is I need to basically go and get his face fixed here. So I need to go and maybe make it a little bit more yellow, for example, and so on. This one looks a little bit too purple, so I would go and make this one like more kind of, you know, yellowish like this and so on. So I would spend a lot of time, actually, my job is to really make everything seamless, look exactly the same, so that you viewers, that you watch it at home, you don't really know that we had to shoot it on different days and match cameras and different angles and the lighting change. Everything has to feel like a very seamless, as if it's all really happening as the same scene. Now I want to show you also a couple of interesting things, you know, that are very specific for HDR, and you know, like where we actually completely, like, you know, love, you know, the HDR. And for example, I'm going to use this scene here. So you see, like, you know, what would happen I'm just going to switch quickly to SDR mode so that you just get the idea. So if I was to make it in SDR, this is basically how the shot would look like. And there's very little room for maneuver for me there. What can I do? I can maybe make it a little bit more darker or something like that. But in reality, there's very little like for me to move around. Okay. So what we actually like about HDR is that we have this dynamic range. So we have the space where to move. So you see, I could now basically make this scene like a very bright. I could make it like this. I could say, oh look, there's like a whole big explosion happening if I want to, right? Or I could say, no, I want to see the detail in the flame. Look, I can totally see like exactly how the flame looks like. I can crash it a little bit like this. I can maybe desaturate it and decide, how much color I have. So we have a huge range that we can work with and that we can then, adjust in how, things can basically be made. So this is like, kind of, like, especially like I think these situations like this where you have like, something that used to be very bright or very colorful is suddenly something that we can really show to the audience how it's really going to look. And what is very interesting is that, this screen that we grade on, and we really grade on these screens. Like Warner Brothers has got 6 of those, and Company 3 has got like quite a few of those. With the same screens we use and we use for reference is something that people at home can also do it, and that's something that we never had before. In the past, we would do something graded on monitor like this, and it would look absolutely fantastic, but we knew no one would ever see that. Because by the time we send it in the TVs, the image would look, absolutely horrible. But I want to show you, like, how the final result looked like. What I'm very proud about this particular job is, what's very interesting is that it's been basically graded by Stefan Donenfeld. And Stefan Donenfeld is on charts of colorists, there is like a choice. He would have the most amount of, golden records and hits kind of. So he would be like Michael Jackson of color grading. And what happens is like, for example, Universal Studios would go sometimes around, now it's like in Hollywood is what we call a pilot season. It starts now in March, so we shoot like a pilots, and then these pilots then get made one episode, and then the studios decide which movie they're going to make, what series they're going to make, and so on. So Universal would normally go like to Stefan and they would say, okay, Stefan, this is what we're going to make today, this year. Which movies do you want to grade? And then he decides what he wants to do, and the rest everybody else can pick up. And it's really like that. He did Star Wars, he did all this. He has an incredible talent. I mean, the guy is very, very talented. And what I really feel proud about it is that not only he kind of decided that he's going to show his face in this commercial, but he really graded it. He said, he took time off his schedule, that he had to grade X amount of movies, and he said, no, I'm going to do this. And what was also very interesting is that, the Panasonic team was sitting in London and watching him grade, like through the like network, through sending a signal, and he was sitting in Santa Monica and basically, doing the grade. And I want to just show you, I think you've seen this video in SDR upstairs, but I want to just show you what the HDR final version looked like. Let me just check that I got the right setting here. 1 second. Oh, good. And let's start. There you go. So, so that would be basically a little bit how color grading works. Now, I'm happy to answer any questions, guys, you have.
What's wrong with black here?
With what black?
Both of them. They're not black.
Oh, really? No, they're black. It's just the way they are, like, they're very black.
Okay.
Anything else, apart from what's wrong with the black?
How do you become a
I
colorist?
have two, if I can, oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I can?
Yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
I have two questions, if I may.
Yeah.
The first one is, when is gamma, when does gamma get involved in the grading?
Mm-hmm.
And the second one is, now that we have also HDR with dynamic metadata,
Mm-hmm.
does it change your way of working
Mhm.
in terms of HDR? And if yes, how?
Okay.
What does it mean?
Okay, so basically the first question, where does the gamma get involved? So what we actually, we don't have gamma any longer, right? We have moved away from gamma to something called like an optical transfer function, okay? So like, and that is called a PQ curve, okay? So there is an equivalent to gamma that we used to have in SDR in HDR, which is called PQ100. And PQ100, it replaces what gamma used to be in SDR, okay? So now we have a PQ curve. So it's called electro-optical transfer function. Okay, so that's kind of the new thing. And we like that electro-optical transfer function because it guarantees us that there is going to be certain brightness for the audience that is going to be like that. Okay, so this is number one thing. The second question, where does the dynamic changes happen? So there are basically two approaches to that. One is by Dolby Vision. What Dolby Vision do is when you finish grading a job in HDR, this is your master. We usually grade everything in PQ1000. And you know, PQ1000 is really what, you know, all of the shots get finished at. Sometimes I get asked by Warner Brothers, for example, to create 2000 nit master, but this is for archive. It never gets shown. You know, there aren't really any 2000 nits screens out there. So we just make it so we have like an archive version. Maybe in the future there is one.
So how do you make it when your monitor doesn't
One
show
second, let me finish. And then basically, so what happens then is then, you know, what we do is then we create something which is called a trim pass, okay? So what trim pass does, it applies dynamic changes or metadata to this HDR grade to make an SDR grade. So Dolby Vision is really good for that you grade HDR and then Dolby Vision converts using this trimming and metadata an SDR version. So that's the only time you need any like a dynamic changes to create and pass to be able to extract an SDR master from HDR. So this is why Netflix likes it, is because we deliver one master, right? And Netflix then makes out of that master SDR streaming and HDR streaming master. Okay, so that's what happens. HDR10 Plus is slightly different. It does not allow you to make an SDR out of HDR, but it gives you ability that you can decide how you want to change brightness from shot to shot if TV is not capable of displaying that brightness, okay? However, I have to tell you one thing. This whole HDR10 Plus is a great idea, but we haven't really seen it being used a lot. At the moment, all shows we grade in HDR are PQ1000 or straight HDR10 or Dolby Vision. Now there are like a requests, you know, Amazon has mentioned that they want to do like a HDR10 Plus, but you know we're about to do that. We can still generate the metadata in here. We export this metadata and that gets that and embedded in a stream. But you know we haven't really like you know seen a lot of that happen. You know that's kind of something that's happening. Now you asked me about how.
Yeah, how do you create a 2000 nit master when your monitor only shows 1000?
This is not the only monitor.
No.
So when you do 2000, you know, there is also one monitor that can do 4000 nits.
The Dolby
Dolby
Pulsar.
monitor. So there is something called Pulsar and Apollo. So there are two types of monitors. You don't buy them, you basically just rent them from Dolby and then you do a pass that is like, you know, very bright pass. But you know, sometimes you feel like you need a sunscreen when you grade like 4,000 nits. I mean, this is really like, you know, I understand that it's kind of future-proofing, but I honestly don't think that it's ever going to be like a standard that we're going to use in the living room. I mean, honestly, you feel like hiding when you see 4,000 nits. Right? It's like too bright. So you know, I actually, you know, don't know whether that's ever going to be like a real standard that we're going to have 4,000 nit screens. I think with 1,000 nits, we're like really like able to get, you know, aesthetically really what we want.
Have you seen the 10,000 nit screen from Sony shown at CES last year?
Mm-hmm. I have seen one from Philips, not from Sony.
Yeah.
Your Philips guys have got one that's water cooled.
Yeah, but do you think 10,000 nits is too bright?
Of course.
Yeah.
You want to use 10,000 nits on a stadium, you know, like, you know, during daylight, you know, because, oh, it's so bright everywhere, do you want to do 10? Try to put 10,000 nits in your living room and you're really going to have a heating for free, you know. You know, 10,000 nits is a lot of light. It's a lot of, and the energy is not just all that, you really feel the heat.
But it's just for some highlights, right?
Exactly.
You don't want to show 10,000 nits all the time. So
but then why do I, you know, I find it that it's very experimental. I don't think that anything like, you know, more than, you know, like even 2,000 nits is never going to be like a standard. We don't really need it. It's not going to happen.
So your preference would be 1,000,
1,000.
like we have now.
Exactly. Stick with 1,000. It makes everything much simpler. Let's not buy new TVs every 2 years, you know. I like to buy a TV and keep it for a few years. So, you know, you buy 1,000 nits, you use it, and it's always going to work absolutely fine.
Panasonic even right.
But you know, everybody's now stuck. Everybody's using the 1,000 nits standard, you know, like really, like in even in YouTube. So, you know, like I honestly think that this has established itself as a basically what HDR is becoming and what is probably going to continue doing. Now, you know, sorry, yeah.
I believe you mentioned you color graded Marco Polo.
Yeah.
And you just said that if you deliver a master to, let's say, Netflix,
Mm-hmm.
they convert it to SDR.
No, I create a Dolby Vision trim pass,
Yeah.
and this trim pass,
Allows the
there is something called CMU. So Dolby playback systems, they have a CMU, and that CMU converts my HDR master into SDR.
so you actually have a say in what the SDR material will look like.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I basically.
That's still your work. Let's
Oh,
put it
no,
like
so
that.
what I do basically is I go and I do first.
By the way, it looks awesome, the Marco Polo.
You like it?
Even,
Thank you.
even on Netflix.
I actually did it twice because what I did, no, honestly, like what I did when I first did it, you know, like there was no other shows. It was the very first show, and
Yeah.
and you know, I didn't even have anybody to phone to ask, hey, how should I do this? You know, I even phoned Dolby. They say,
Why?
we don't know, we never done this, you know. So basically, what I had to do is I had to experiment a little bit. And the first 3 episodes, I graded too much. And that's the problem usually. When you sit in front of the HDR, guys, you know, like you'll see, like, you know, it is very easy to become excited about a lot of color and everything, you know. So this is exactly what I did. And then I realized, but hang on a moment, this is 16th century, right? You know, where did they have colors as bright as this in 16th century? Let's go and turn it down. So I came on the weekends without producer knowing, and I was turning everything down to make it look like a normal, you know, HDR. But you know, it's the same thing with the surround sound. If you remember, when surround sound came, you would go to the cinema and helicopter would always fly from back to forth. There was always some sound effects like zooming. And this is the same thing we did with HDR to begin with. Then we kind of calmed down. We said, okay, relax. We know we have the color and dynamic range, but let's make now movies. So that was like a little bit a learning process. Another learning process we did was as well as at the beginning we thought we're going to make an SDR grade and we're going to turn it into HDR, but it turns out that the image looks much better when you grade it HDR and then make SDR. So you're like, you know, like SDR, when you make an HDR, it just looks like a brighter SDR. It doesn't look any interesting, but when you make a good HDR image, you make it say, oh my God, SDR looks so much better. So
Wow.
that's basically kind of a big learning curve. So right now, when we do Netflix shows, we grade both at the same time. So we usually have like a, you know, we do this and we trim at the same time so that in 4 days we can complete both HDR and SDR master.
So your
Essentially,
approach-
it's double work.
It is double work, yeah,
Yeah.
but we get paid the same.
Okay.
this approach is also for picture release.
Sorry?
This approach of working in HDR and then obtaining an SDR image is
Mhm.
also for the for the movie in the
Cinema?
theater
No.
release?
No.
Okay, okay.
The reason why is because cinemas have got a different color space, which is
Yes,
called
sure.
a P3,
Yes.
different white balance, which is 59,000 Kelvin, and what's also important, cinema screens today are like, you know, like 7.5 foot lumberts. You know, it's a different measurement, not nits. So you know, you really need to put the picture in the theater and literally trim shot by shot to make it work. Also, what's different about theater, you see, in a television grading, we have light in the theater. We are never in darkness because there has to be a light. Nobody's watching movie in full darkness apart few moments, right? So you want to be able to. In cinema, we're in the darkness, so we can be darker. Contrast is different. So we need to do a full pass for cinema release.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of one that is still, but that's kind of fun part. We always liked grading in a theater. You know, like grading in theater has got some sort of, you know, like it feels good. You know, you sit in a cinema. And this is nice.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
In grading sessions, maybe there are very often a still image on the screen, on the display.
Mhm.
Maybe also in HDR.
Mhm.
Did you experience any retention issue on OLED display?
Only time we got it is like, for example, if I leave an image and I go for a lunch, but
Mhm.
not necessarily on these shots. Like, you know, what would happen is if you have a time code,
Yeah.
that would say then. But you know, like these TVs have got like a mode for reset where they kind of do something and they clean it. So we have got it. Like I did come back once from a lunch and I played back and there was a time code still in the image, and then you know there you press something on a remote and then it kind of resets itself. But what's also smart is that these TVs have a screensaver automatically, and then you know if you don't do much, they first dim down a little bit after a while, and then they switch on like a logo that just kind of moves around and so preserves the screen. So yeah, you were right, it can happen. So there is like a protection built in.
Mm-hmm.
Did you wanted to ask me how did you become a colorist, yeah?
How does someone become a colorist?
That's a good question. When I was becoming a colorist, like 15 years ago, I have to tell you, I've seen color grading. I was a DJ and I didn't really know anything about color, but I walked into grading suite and I was like, my God, this is like DJing with colors. I want to do this. And I asked the colorist, how'd you become a colorist? And he looked at me. Who is this guy with funny accent? You know, what does he want? You know, colorists were like semi-gods back then. You know, they were like driving Lamborghinis and had bank accounts in Switzerland. You know, it was like something, you want to become like me? No way. Then I went to an assistant. There was an assistant there. And I said, you know, how can I become colorist? He said, well, you become an assistant and after a while you become a colorist. I said, when can I become assistant? He said, when that guy gets heart attack and I get his job. So it was impossible, right? You know, so however I got lucky in LA, I met my teacher who taught me, you know, how to do it. So, but that was back in the day. Today, we're a little bit better organized. So there are actually training facilities today that you can do. Like we have one in Los Angeles and one in New York, where you can take courses and you can learn, you know, the skill of grading. You know, you also need to learn a lot about color science today. It's much more complicated right now because different cameras, different color spaces, different masters. So you really need to master all this art of, you know, color management, dynamic range management. And then, you know, you kind of then start, you know, learning the software. Software learning is quite easy. There's a lots of YouTube videos that will teach you how to operate the software. But it's still very hard to find a position where a master colorist will teach you. So, but what's better is that you can actually do courses, finish it, and then, you know, these systems are, you know, affordable. Nowadays, you can just, you know, use your laptop with the DaVinci Resolve and start grading. Get one of these monitors and you can do a little bit HDR grading. So it's actually possible to do it. So there is a really growing amount of colorists that are coming up that are basically, you know, grassroots colorists that are basically learning themselves, you know, like going on courses, practicing a lot of grading, and so becoming, you know, better in it. There is more demand for color grading, you know, like everybody wants their images to look beautiful, you know. I had the other day a company called Cisco, you know, asking me to grade in 4K and HDR interviews. And I was like, are you guys sure about, I mean, this is a guy sitting in a suit, like, you know, talking head, like for 5 minutes, and you want to grade it in HDR, are you sure? No, we want this to look the best possible. So everybody's like basically trying to make their images look better. So there's demand for more and more colorists. So like that, you can really get into it.
I'm really sorry I missed the beginning of the session, but with that screen there, is that going to be your main grading screen?
Yeah, because look at it, like, you know, look, I mean, like, I want you to just basically have a like a, you know, compare. You see the, you know, how good these two screens match. So, you know, and you know, by the way, you know, do you know how I matched these two screens? I basically went to a setting which is called Professional 1. And that was it, you know, I just switched it into Professional 1. I personally just go and turn down saturation for 5 points because I always feel that they're a little bit too saturated. And that's it, they match. So this is kind of really very straightforward. And because of its size and the quality, you know, people like to watch this more than this screen.
I can't help but notice that there's lighting behind the screen. Is that intentional bias lighting?
Absolutely, you have to do this. If you don't have a lighting behind an HDR screen, I would recommend you
Is this
put
what
one.
you would normally have it as bright as? Because
Yes.
under the, you know, their specification it says like 5 nits. That's totally not true then.
You know, I'm not sure who made the specification of 5 nits. I'm not quite 100% sure. The only thing I would have different is I would have a gray behind
Yeah.
it, you know? And the more important than the brightness of the light is the temperature of the light. So the light should be like a 6500 Kelvin. That's a kind of the temperature of the light. And that is very important because your perception of contrast is completely different if there is no light like that. You see much more contrast in darkness. So when you put that light, the eyes don't get fatigued. Then you can work for many hours without being tired of looking at a very bright image.
Are you affected by the white subpixel dilution of these WRGB OLEDs? Because if you look at the file here, clearly the RGB OLED has more saturation.
It does, only in the highlight. And I can show you, like, you know, it's very, you have to not, like, you can see it on a very few scenes. So, like, you know, there are only, like, a highlight moments. Let me just see where is the one scene, like, you know, where you can see that. Maybe, oh no, actually I have one scene here. Let me show you. So, for example, here. Okay, so have a look now, like, you know, you see those spotlights at the back? You see they are a little bit less yellow on this screen and on this screen. That's kind of what I see. But you know what? Nobody at home will ever see them this yellow. There is, I don't know anybody who's got 30,000 screen and watches movies at home with that screen.
Tell that to Samsung and their color volume bands.
Yeah, but you know, like, you know, what do you think? What's more important, to be color accurate or have a color volume? I think, you know, like the fact that I can switch the screen on, put it in Professional 1 and match these two screens is more important to me than have it, you know.
For the record, I fully agree with you. You know, I think the color volume thing, you know, is overblown anyway. So
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, you know what? I think we're all going to see that, you know, with the development of, you know, screen technologies, we're going to probably in the future overcome limitation of OLED that we have at the moment. But for your information, if you want to buy this screen, you can't. Sony does not make them anymore.
Oh, yes.
They stopped. Actually, this screen is now more expensive second-hand than it was when it was new.
What do you think of the replacement and the dual LCD replacement?
Anyway, I think we're coming to the end of the session. I know Dado's going to be attending the dinner tonight, so Vincent,
Right.
you can ask him all about Sony there.
Yes.
I can tell you.
Dado's also available for any other interviews as well after this, so I'd like to give Dado a big round of applause.
Yeah, thank you.